listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 414.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Outdoors Station. The recent podcast I did introducing listeners to the Tough Girl podcast and the Adventure Sports podcast have opened us up to new listeners, so welcome aboard everyone. It's also opened us up to new inspiring people to chat to, and one of those is the subject of today's interview, Megan Cumberledge, who literally has just returned home from a solo 5,631 kilometre or 3,519 mile cycle trip from London to Athens. As you'll hear, it involved a series of firsts for Megan. Now, people we've spoken to in the past have often planned their trips to a very tight timetable. So it's refreshing to hear her approach being much looser and rewarding as a result. As you listen to this, do visit the Outdoors Station website. The links there will take you to her extremely well written and amusing blog, her Instagram and Twitter accounts, which of course will all add more visual information to some of the things we touch on. So why did Megan, who is in her late 20s, suddenly take 3 months' time off work this August to cycle to Athens?
Well, I've wanted to do a big trip for a long time, and I guess I'd read books and blogs by other people who'd done similar adventures. I've been thinking about it for quite a few years and putting it off, and I think eventually I sort of realised the only difference between the people who'd done it and myself was that they just actually started to go and do their trip, and I was just sitting around just thinking about it. So I decided that I was just going to do it. It was only about 6 months before I left. I decided this is the time, I'm going to do it now.
I noticed from your blog, which I suggest people have a look at as we're discussing this so they can get a flavour of your adventure, you appear to be quite an established cyclist.
Well, I cycled to work, but I mean, that's only about 3 kilometres, although it is up a very big hill, so that does help. I had done a few trips before this, but only really weekend trips around the UK. The longest trip I'd ever done was in Iceland, and that was only 5 days. So I'd never really done anything big before, and I'd never done anything on my own either. But I figured a long trip is just lots of short trips back to back. So how much harder could it be?
Exactly, that's a good way of looking at it. So the Iceland trip then, that sounded interesting. Was that like an organised week away?
No, it was with a friend of mine. We went there for 2.5 weeks, and we did a week of trekking in the first week. Iceland is absolutely stunning, and that was on a trail called the Landmannalaugar Trail, and it's an established walk, which was great. And in the second week, we hired some bikes in Reykjavik, and we went off to the Western Fjords, and we just did our own route around there for 5 days. Well,
that sounds wonderful in itself as a trip.
It was absolutely stunning. I'd really recommend Iceland as a cycling and a trekking destination. It's got the most unusual scenery I've ever seen.
And just as an aside from the main story, how easy is it to rent bikes there and presumably wild camp around Iceland?
It's easy to rent bikes, but it's not cheap. It's easy to transport them around the country, so we had to get a couple of buses there. And I didn't wild camp in Iceland. We stayed at actually completely deserted campsites, but there were loads of campsites, and they were very nice and completely empty.
Oh, okay, well that's one for everybody's list then. That sounds good. So why this particular trip? Why London to Athens?
Well, because it was my first trip on my own. I wanted to I felt more comfortable going somewhere that wasn't too far from home. So I knew if something went wrong, I would be able to get back quite easily. I also really liked the idea of setting off from England and seeing how the landscapes and everything changed the further that I got from home. And that was really amazing. By the time I got to the Balkans, obviously everything was completely different, the cultures and the landscapes. but it was a very gradual change, and I really enjoyed seeing that shift for myself. So that's why I really wanted to set off from home, I guess. And also, it means you don't have to box up your bike and put it in a plane twice. You only have to do it once.
Well, yes, we'll come on to the practicalities of some of these things, because your story on your blog and your photographs do indicate how challenging that can be. Possibly even the hardest part of the whole trip in some ways.
Yeah.
So let's actually get into the trip then. So you plan to set off during autumn. I believe you took extended leave from work, is that right?
Yes, I had a 3 months, like a sabbatical, so unpaid leave.
Right. And as an aside, how did you get the nickname Tron as an engineer?
That's actually not related to my job. It's related. I actually play Ultimate Frisbee, and it's a name that my teammates call me, Megatron. I think it's supposed to reference me being strong or something like that.
Okay, you don't come apart and fold in half then when there's problems.
Unfortunately not, no.
and there's another story there. Ultimate Frisbee. How on earth do you get into that?
Well, through university, I actually took it up originally because I wanted to get fit for netball, which I used to play, and then I just absolutely fell in love with it. It's such a brilliant sport, and it's the reason that I moved to Bristol. Got a really great team there called Nice Bristols, and they're very successful. We went to the World Championships in 2014, and we'll be trying to qualify again in 2018. So it's a brilliant sport, and it's such a great community. Not that many people play. So, it's quite a niche sport, I guess. So, you're always meeting the same people, and it's very friendly and really good fun.
So what's the structure of the game?
I kind of say that it's a bit like American football in terms of, you have end zones and you have to score. You have two teams trying to score in opposite directions, and you score by catching it in the end zone, but it's not contact like American football is. It's a non-contact sport. Okay. Well, I've heard the name, but I've never actually thought to ask anybody the question, what's involved in playing it? A lot of people think that you're just like stood around in a circle, just throwing the disc around. That's not what it is at all.
Yeah, okay then. So how many in the team? How many play this?
Seven aside, but the team is maybe up to 20 people. You can swap, after every point. And
is it a game of two halves?
It is a game of two halves, yeah. Games are normally about 100 minutes long.
Okay. Cool. Right, well, there's obviously another subject we could talk about for hours on end, but let's get back to the cycling trip. So you took an extended leave, decided to leave in June, is that right?
August, actually.
August,
I would have left earlier, but I had a wedding to go to. I was bridesmaid at the end of July.
And they wouldn't move it?
I
know. Now, I take it you didn't wear cycling gear to the wedding?
I didn't, know. I don't think that would have been allowed.
All right, okay. But you set off shortly after?
Yeah, pretty much the day after. The wedding was on the Saturday, and I set off. Well, I went to London on the Sunday, and I set off on the Monday. Right,
now, I think anybody, again, I do recommend you read the blog because it's very, very well written. I must compliment you on that. It's very entertaining, well written, lovely tone, and the photographs are excellent as well. But you didn't have a good start, did you?
I didn't, know. The first day was probably one of the most difficult days of the whole trip. It started off, I was getting ready to leave the house. My friend came with me for the first 2 days and got ready to push off from the drive. New pedals, clipped in one of the first times. And of course, I somehow lost control and I fell over on the drive, couldn't unclip, just like a sack of potatoes. So I fell off, and then after half an hour, I got my first puncture. And that was actually the only puncture I got on the entire trip. But I'd only gone about 2 miles, and I got a puncture right in central London. And then another friend who cycled with me, she got 6 punctures on that day. So altogether we had like 7 punctures in one day. We didn't get anywhere near as far as we wanted to get. I had to cycle off to Halfords to find some spare tyres. It was raining, we had nowhere to stay. It was a bit of a baptism of fire, really.
Just a bit. Were you a bit demoralised that night?
Well, luckily, a lady let us camp on her farm, and then we went out for a curry, and I felt a lot better after that. But I do remember thinking, oh, my life, I can't even cycle out of London. It took a whole day to get out of London. how am I ever going to make it to Greece? It did seem like Greece was a very long way away at that point.
I bet it did. And the sort of the gear that you were carrying with you, we'll come on to sort of details towards the end. But looking at your photographs, you just had is it the two main panniers?
Yeah, I just had two back panniers. My tent was strapped on top of that, and then I had a handlebar bag as well. Right,
okay. And did you do, because the bike you had was a Specialised bike, I see, did you do any modifications to the bike for sort of a variety of roads that you'd be coming across?
A couple of things. I got some very good tyres, so I did only get that one puncture. They're Marathon Schwalbe Plus, highly recommend those tyres. I also, like I said, got some touring pedals, so they had clip-in cleats on one side and flat on the other side. And then I got some handlebars just with sort of upturns on the end so you can slightly alter your riding position. But apart from that, I didn't really do any modifications to the bike. Cool. One thing I would have done, there's a couple of things I would have done. So my pannier rack broke after about 1 week because I didn't have a very strong one. So I had to, first of all, I had to duct tape it up for a couple of days because all the shops in France are shut on Sunday and Monday. So I had to have a duct tape pannier rack for a while. And also I would have changed the saddle because it was incredibly uncomfortable.
Oh, right. So it was a female-friendly saddle because you can get all sorts of different types now, can't you?
It was just the one that came with the bike. And the bike was brilliant, but it wasn't a touring saddle. So it wasn't really made for really long days in the saddle.
Right. Okay. Okay. So you made it out of London. Just.
Eventually.
You had some friends with you, obviously, as you left London. So how long did they stay with you for?
Just to Calais. They just did the UK leg, first 2 days.
Okay. And so by the time you actually got to Calais, then, were you sort of starting to feel a little bit more sort of excited?
Yeah, so my parents came with me as well after Calais for about 2 days, just to camp with me. And then in Belgium, in Ghent, I set off on my own for the first time. And I was incredibly nervous at that point.
I was going to say, how did it all feel on that day then? Describe that to us.
It was very strange. I remember my parents leaving me in Ghent and I was off to meet my first warm showers host. Do you know what warm showers is?
Yeah, the cycling fraternity's way of supporting each other. Yes.
So I was off to meet my first host in Ghent and I had no idea what to expect. I'd never done that before. And it was, luckily, he was absolutely brilliant and I had a great night. And after that, I felt completely fine. I was really put at ease because I'd had such a lovely evening with a complete stranger. And after that, it was fine. But I remember was walking through Ghent on my own, trying to find his house and just feeling very overwhelmed.
Yeah, so that's the sort of time, isn't it, when things dusk is approaching and you're getting tired and you don't speak the language and you've just got a slip of paper and trying to put two and two together and it all starts to come to a head then, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That's what it was like, yeah.
Cool. Well, I've heard about we've interviewed quite a few cyclists in the past, and they've all mentioned the Warm Showers network, which is a great network. Did you use that very often? Was it 88 days? Wasn't it your trip? So did you use?
Days. I think I stayed with 10 Warm Showers hosts altogether.
Right.
And mainly in Western Europe because there's quite a lot of hosts in Western Europe, but once I sort of got past Italy, there weren't anywhere near as many hosts, so I didn't use it so frequently.
Okay. And so you left there. When was the sort of first time then you did any wild camping as such?
It took me a while to work up to it. I was probably the thing that I was the most nervous about. But I don't think I'd ever even stayed in a tent on my own, never mind that wild camping.
Baptism of fire?
Yeah. So I put it off for about 2 weeks. And I remember I stayed with a Warm Showers host in Germany and he had talked to me about wild camping and he was saying how he really liked it because you really connect with nature and it's really relaxing. So I was like, yes. Then he sort of reminded me what I really liked about wild camping. So the next day I was like, I'm just going to do it. Whatever happens, I'm going to do a wild camp. But it turns out I was in this really industrial city in Germany and I just found this, I was right near a main road and it was just like a river running next to it and there's huge bramble bushes in between. I managed to find a tiny path through these bushes where the fishermen go and the most absolutely tiny piece of grass covered in thistles. And I was like, I have to just do it now, get it over with. So I put my tent up. Got a lot of prickles in the process, but it was quite a nice view of the rather murky river and a background soundtrack of the busy road. But I was really pleased that I'd done it then.
Well, that set you up, certainly. The people you're meeting then as you came through sort of Western Europe, did you arrange to meet people to join you along the way through the Warm Showers network, or did you bump into other cyclists and they decided to cycle with you for a few days, or how did that sort of work?
I didn't meet many other cyclists at that point. I met people through the Warm Showers network, although I did meet a couple of girls on the cycle path into Belgium, and I cycled with them for the day, and then they invited me to stay with them, which was brilliant. And I also had another technique that I used, which was essentially just knocking on people's doors and asking if I could camp in their garden. I tended to use that when I couldn't find a wild spot or a campsite, and just through that, people were amazing. Like, they'd let me camp on their farm, or sometimes they invited me into their house, or they offered me food, and I met a lot of people that way, which was really, really nice.
Now, your blog dictates the fact that you had this magic letter.
Yes.
So do explain how you actually produced so many different letters in so many different languages, and what the letter contained, of course.
So it was essentially just a paragraph or so which said who I am, like what my name is, where I was travelling to, and saying I'm on my own, I'm looking for a place to camp. Is it all right to camp in your garden? So I used that so I speak a bit of German, so in the German-speaking countries, I would just ask them in German if I could stay in their garden. But whenever I was going into a country which didn't speak the language, I'd just put it into Google Translate. And just...
No! Did you ever translate it back?
No, I didn't. I was a little bit worried. I had one day. So this letter was incredibly successful for a lot of my trip. People were very helpful once they read it. But then I had one day, just entered Bosnia, and I had 10 people turn me away, and I could not. I was like, I was getting a bit paranoid that my letter was wrong. So I did get somebody to check it that time, and he couldn't see anything wrong with it. I think I was just in an unfriendly part of town, but most of the time I think it was correct, and it was very successful.
Okay. Well, a few times I've used Google Translate. You start off with one sentence and it comes back, "Your cat has died, please bury it."
Yeah.
I just imagine if you translated it back, it said something completely different.
Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our free programmes. Visit our website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk or look us up on Facebook.
Well, let's look at the trip. Rather than me do it, you describe list the countries you went through, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so I started obviously in the UK, which was just rained the whole time and was incredibly challenging. And then I went over the channel I went into France, but only very briefly. I went along the north coast into Belgium towards Ostend. Then I went all the way across Belgium through Ghent, Brussels, Bruges, towards Luxembourg. All of that part was really flat. All of that northern France and northern Belgium was really, really flat. Lots of farmland. And then I went into Luxembourg, which is tiny, but a bit of a gem. It's very beautiful, Luxembourg. Has excellent cycling paths, really, really good. And Luxembourg City is very beautiful and very interesting place. I spent a rest day there. They've got lots of old walls, and it's built on a rock, and it's definitely worth a visit if you're ever in the area. From Luxembourg, I sort of border hopped between France and Germany down the Rhine and into Switzerland, where in Switzerland I spent 2 weeks. I met up with some friends and family, did some climbing, and spent a bit of time at Lake Geneva. Then I went over the Alps into northern Italy, which is again very flat and I found to be incredibly boring, to Venice, which is very beautiful. From Venice I I met a friend there who cycled with me up to Budapest. So I went through Slovenia and Hungary up to Budapest. Then I went south along the Danube into Bosnia to Sarajevo, and then back to the west coast of that sort of Montenegro, Croatia, Montenegro, Albania, and then to Athens.
Wow, and that's the total of 5,631 kilometres for people that don't know, which I think at the top of my head is just over 3,000 miles.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So if you put this plan together in a fairly short period of time, how did you research the route that you took, all the different roads and the tracks and the places to stay? I mean, was it purely night after night spent on Google, or did you have somebody else's route that you sort of adapted as you did this?
I pretty much just made it up as I went along. The first part, I knew that I was meeting some people in Switzerland, so I had to get there. And there's sort of a Eurovelo route that goes there. Although in reality, it's not really a signed route in most places. But that sort of gave me a bit of a structure to the first bit. And in that part of the world, it's easy to follow signposts and to pick up maps from tourist information and that kind of thing. So I generally relied on just sort of those free maps to navigate around there. And then I met my friend in Venice, and we were going to Budapest. And she'd sort of planned that part of the route. We had a couple of maps, we just sort of planned it day by day, really, looking at the roads we wanted to go on. It's very hard to plan ahead. Like when I was thinking about route planning from home, I had no idea how fast I would cycle or what the road conditions would be like and those kind of things. So every day I was changing my route and planning based on the experiences that I'd had in each country. And when I got to Eastern Europe, I didn't have a clue where I was going to go, really. I had no idea how to get from Budapest to Athens. So I bought a Lonely Planet guide in Budapest and had a look at what was some of the highlights of that country. And I also spoke to people as I went along. That definitely shaped quite a lot of the journey. And so, yeah, it was constantly changing, always changing, every day.
Well, I think that's very impressive, because most people would probably plan it fairly tight before they do a trip of this sort of length or period of time. So, and I think it's more entrepreneurial in your travelling spirit to do it the way you've done it. So, hats off to you for that point of view. I noticed again, looking at your blog fairly closely, you've had a few days where you've taken in the sights or taking in, like you were saying about Luxembourg and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you took that on a spontaneous basis.
Yeah. Like the trip for me was it was very much like I wanted to be able to enjoy the places that I was at as I went along. I didn't try and go super fast. You could easily do the route that I did. Some people probably do it in 3 weeks, and I took 3 months. You could probably do it fairly easily in 2 months if you wanted to. But I very much was keen to see places as I went along. So the only difficult thing is finding accommodation for multiple nights in order to have a rest day. So occasionally I had a friendly host who'd let me stay for 2 nights, or I'd stay in a campsite for 2 nights. Or when I was in the big cities, I did tend to stay in hostels as well. So Budapest and Sarajevo, for example, they were both cities that I really wanted to see, so I stayed in hostel for a few nights there.
Oh, I see. So the warm showers then is based primarily on a one-night stay?
Well, I'm not really sure. I did stay at one place for 2 nights, but obviously you don't want to get in the way or to outstay your welcome, so I tended to only stay for 1 night, really.
And what's your impression then of the different countries you went through? You said that you set off from London, and England left you with a very wet and weary impression, I'm sure. But the people and the places you went through, you particularly mentioned Luxembourg and obviously Venice. But is there a generalisation you could say for any other people thinking of cycling in Europe about the actual respect that the other road users gave you, or just the welcome that you had as a solo female traveller?
Well, so with regards to road conditions, you don't even need to worry in Western Europe. Like, there are so many cycle paths. The first month of my trip, I was barely even on the roads. And then I found the further I went along, the main roads were quite challenging. So I was very diligent in when I looked at my maps to try and stick to the quiet roads. And that did mean occasionally that I found myself in situations where I was on very badly paved roads and very steep roads and those kind of things. But often in those kind of situations, you find that they are also the most rewarding roads. They're the places where people don't tend to go. You get the better views. You get a better impression of what life is like, sort of rural life in the countrysides, those kind of things. So although they're tough, they're definitely more rewarding. And that has made me think about my touring setup and how I might change that for future trips. With regards to my welcome as a solo female, I was almost exclusively met with open arms by people. There's so much kindness and hospitality shown, especially in Montenegro and Albania. You'd just be cycling down the roads and people would flag you down and invite you to come and have coffee with them next to the road, and people would not let me buy my vegetables at stalls. They'd insist on giving them to me for free, and they'd come over and give me food, and it was really, really quite humbling. It was amazing, the hospitality that I received. And with regards to being a solo female, I was obviously very careful to make sure that I never put myself in a situation where I was unsafe, but I think you actually receive more help and more hospitality being a solo female, because everyone just wants to look out for you and help you, and they all think that everybody else in the world is out to get you apart from them.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, exploring the safety topic for a bit longer, I should imagine your family, as any family naturally would obviously be concerned about your safety. And I just wondered how your friends generally across the board reacted to your plans before you set out.
A lot of them thought I was quite a bit mad, but generally they were very supportive. And I think they were sort of thought, well, it's the kind of thing Tron does. She does these harebrained schemes, so she'll be all right. I think my family were a little bit worried to start with, but I think once I'd been going for a while, they sort of realised not everyone was out to get me and that I'd probably be fine. I had a little map on my website, on my blog, where each night, if I had internet access, I sort of put a little pin to show you where I was. So then everybody at home who was following my blog could see if I put a pin, then they knew that I was safe. That I was sort of settled somewhere for the night.
So would you say then your confidence, I mean, you obviously did this partly seat of the pants and seeing how it goes and letting luck fall your way, which I fully respect. But was part of you considering that your confidence, there was a stage when your confidence suddenly grew and you go, right, yeah, everything's okay, I am in control, as opposed to things controlling me?
Well, definitely with the camping and the accommodation. So for the first sort of couple of weeks, I generally stayed in campsites a little bit more, and then after a while I became a lot more confident with wild camping and with asking to stay on farms and that kind of thing. So my confidence definitely really grew with that. With regards to the cycling, the first sort of month, the cycling wasn't really the challenge. The challenge was sort of the daily finding food, water and shelter. But like I said, my confidence with that grew, and then once I sort of reached the Alps and then the Balkan Mountains in Eastern Europe, the cycling challenges itself definitely increased as I went along.
Certainly, I'm looking at your day's diary at the moment and looking at sort of day 44, 45 onwards, where you're now talking about Slovenia and Hungary and Budapest. Those places are certainly the places where people, as understandably, we're in Western Europe. It's not that familiar to us as regards the culture and some of the internal politics and also the social politics from the type of thing that you were doing. Did you notice anything massively different there that affected you, the way that you approach things at all? Just as sort of dealing with people or asking for food or concerned about your safety even, I'll
be honest, I only think that people got even friendlier the longer that I went along. There was definitely, it's quite strange, you kind of expect borders to not really have, they're just something that we've made up as the human race, aren't they, really? But often when you went from one country to another over the border, you could really tell that things had changed. Especially, it was quite easy to tell how affluent a country was from whether it looked after its roads and how much litter there was and the sort of style of the shops and what the people were wearing. So, for example, going from Slovenia to Hungary, like Slovenia is really quite a well-off country compared to Hungary. And I really noticed that when I went over the border. There's a big change there. But not in terms of the way that I was treated, like I said, no, it only really seemed to get better, if anything.
I noticed you made a comment about something in Switzerland. I think it was somebody they weren't very welcoming or something. Just a matter of interest, are you finding that the poorer countries gave you a warmer welcome than the richer countries?
That one day where no one would let me stay was actually in Bosnia. And Bosnia then turned out to be my favourite country of the whole trip. I think I had an incredibly unlucky day. But yeah, with the poorer countries, I'd definitely say they were more forthcoming in terms of how much they wanted to talk to me. Like the locals were always waving and trying to flag you down to have a conversation and engaging you and that kind of thing. And people were definitely not unfriendly in Western Europe. Everyone was incredibly friendly for the whole trip. But I'd just say they're maybe a bit less likely to approach you. You probably look more normal in Western Europe, whereas in Eastern Europe, I probably stuck out like a sore thumb. So
right. Again, flipping through the days, but it's certainly towards the Eastern Europe side somewhere. Tell me about this massive hangover you had.
Oh, gosh. Oh, I still feel a bit sick just thinking about it. Everybody along the trip, they all have this drink. So they call it either schnapps or parlinka or rakia. But it's all the same drink, and I just think it just tastes like hairspray to me. It's just awful. And, as soon as you sit down with someone, they want to share their drink with you. And this happened to me in Hungary. I'd gone to look for a camping spot, and I'd asked somebody who was near to the Danube if I could camp in their garden. He said, no, I've got this house. You can stay in my house. Come, sit down, have a drink. I'd not eaten any dinner, but he gave me this big glass of this parlinka, and one thing led to another, and we had quite a lot of glasses, and he led me off down the river to meet his parents, and he took me to another house to meet some neighbours. So lots of parlinka was consumed, and well, safe to say I was quite the worse for wear that night, and I had this terrible hangover the next morning. And he'd invited me for lunch with his family the next day at midday, and it took everything I'd got to be able to pull myself together to go for that meal, which turned out to be an end of summer party with his entire family, and they'd cooked a stew with an 80-kilogram sheep. Oh, dearie me.
Well, yeah. There's a story to tell your friends.
Yeah, it was great, and luckily the stew was really nice, and I think it was just what I needed
to soak it all up. So, were there any other sort of moments like that then with people that you met randomly along the way?
I do another standout moment would probably have been in Germany. So I couldn't find, again, I knocked on the door of this farm, and I did my best German and said, can I camp in your garden? And he said, no, come in. You're all on your own and I'm on your own. And I was a bit, he was just a man on his own, but I thought I was probably safe because he was an 88-year-old German farmer. So he was very frail, so I didn't think that he was threatening to me in any way. So I went in, he didn't speak a word of English, and my German's pretty, it's all right, conversational maybe, but it's by no means very stellar. But we spent the whole evening together watching the Olympics. He let me cook in his kitchen, and he gave me a little tour of his farm, and it was absolutely brilliant. He would just have been on his own. I guess it was quite a special experience for him as well. It was nice for him to have some company, and it was great for me. So that was a really lovely evening, really nice.
Wow. So did you take any sort of emergency food with you in case you couldn't find something, or did you literally just hoof it and plan and live off the road, as it were, as you went, and just pick up supplies as you went through the day?
Well, I learned my lesson about food quite early on when I found all the shops to be closed on Sundays. it's quite difficult to get the balance right because you don't want to carry too much because it's heavy, but you also don't want to end up in a situation where you're really hungry. And a few times I did get it wrong and I didn't have any food. And equally on the opposite extreme, a few times I got it wrong and I had way too much food, or I ordered too much at a restaurant and was just absolutely stuffed. But it is difficult when you go from country to country. They're very different foods in supermarkets, and sometimes it's easy to find them and sometimes it's not. But yeah, generally I tried to have some food in my bag as a backup just in case I couldn't find anything.
Because I noticed in your pictures that you obviously took the basic cooking gear with you.
Yes, I did. Just like a burner and a one-pot thing.
Right, okay. So there was always that as an emergency if you needed to.
Yeah, and I always used that when I was camping as well. I did a lot of cooking when I was camping. And I say a lot of cooking, pasta and sauce.
Yeah, I think I saw the cryptic comment, pasta again.
Yeah, certainly not gourmet meals, but it always tastes really good after a day of cycling.
So let's just talk food for a second then. As you went through all these different countries and specialities, no doubt you were treating yourself because you were obviously naturally burning off all the calories. Yeah. What were the best pastries?
I'd have to say Greece. I wasn't expecting it, but their pastries are out of this world. They have great savoury and great sweet pastries. So they have a spinna cotta, I really love spinna cotta. Oh, but then they have burek as well, actually, in Bosnia, which is really, really good. But no, Greece definitely won on the pastry stakes. I pretty much was eating an all-pastry diet for the week that I was in Greece.
Well, it's fantastic to have eaten anything you like and just know you're going to burn it off.
Yeah, it's brilliant, because I love eating as well. Great.
Eating and cycling, excellent. Yeah. So you said you use the PIN system to let people know you're okay. Just give me an idea, or give other cyclists an idea. What was the technology that you took with you? What tech did you take?
I just had my phone, which I used also as a camera, and on my phone contract, I could actually use the internet and things in quite a lot of the countries that I went through just on my normal contract. I didn't have to pay anything extra, which probably made everything a lot easier for me, because it meant that I could be in touch with people back home fairly regularly without too much difficulty. And I also used it for navigation a bit in towards the end of the trip. I had like a navigation app on there, so when I couldn't get the free maps from tourist information anymore, I used that.
I was going to ask if you sort of had any dedicated mapping software at all.
Yes, I had an app called Osmand, and it gets its information from OpenStreetMap, and it's very good for cycling because in a lot of parts of the world it also has some of the cycle paths marked on there. It's good for cycling directions, which I met a lot of other cyclists that had used it as well, so I'd recommend that.
And in the places you went through and the people you were speaking to, whether it was English or German or whatever however you managed it, obviously the subject of Brexit must have come up a few times. What was the general feeling towards you on that? Yeah,
it came up a lot, yes. I was obviously a bit worried about embarking on a trip across Europe when everybody hates us straight after Brexit. Well, that's what I sort of thought anyway. But actually everybody was most people were very sympathetic towards us, and actually were sort of very saddened about the fact that we were going to be leaving the EU. They didn't blame it on me at all, and they just sort of sympathised with it, I guess. It was interesting when I was in Belgium because in Brussels they joked a lot about how Brussels was a hellhole because Trump had visited and called it a hellhole, and so yeah, it definitely was not. They didn't blame me for it, I guess. They were very understanding.
I just wondered what their attitude to somebody leaving was. It sounded like they were, not surprised.
Well, one of them likened it to going through a breakup, losing a partner. They were sort of very sad that we were going to be leaving. It's kind of a member of the family in a way, I guess.
Podcasts are based solely around self-powered travel. If you walk, run, cycle, paddle, climb, explore or sail, we want to share your adventure, hear your highs and lows, and inspire others to go out and do more.
Okay, well, I think we've touched on the fact that you obviously had a great trip. The weather was generally fairly kind to you. I think it just got a bit chilly towards the end.
Yeah.
Which brings me on really to another little favourite subject of interest is all of with these any trip really is equipment, of course, and gear. We all have our own little fantasies about what we would take and wouldn't take on a trip like this.
Yeah.
Could you just give us a brief run through of what was in your panniers, what gear you took, just to give other cyclists or potential cyclists an idea of what to take, and then we'll talk about sort of the goods and the bads and what could be improved next time.
Yeah, so I had my 2 panniers. One was sort of personal items. I had my clothes in there, all of my toiletries, things for cold weather, that kind of thing. And then the other pannier was sort of the cooking pannier. So I had just a gas burner, a pot, my food, my bedding. That was in the other one. So I had a like an inflatable mattress and sleeping bag. Obviously, all my repair kit, my electronic things were in my bar bag, along with sort of like sun cream and sunglasses and insect repellent and all those dog spray. Or I had this dog spray for the vicious dogs of Greece, and sort of the little bits that you need all of the time. And then on the bike, I also had a dry bag with my tent in. I took a 2-man tent, a relatively small 2-man tent, which I've been using for years, because I didn't want to buy a new tent, which I wanted to keep cost light, and it meant that when I was in it on my own, I had loads of room. It was very spacious, but also with a couple of friends that came out to join me, they didn't have to bring a tent. They could just stay in that one.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It was a little Van Gogh tent, wasn't it?
Yeah, Van Gogh blade, yeah.
Cool.
Very good, actually.
And when you say clothing, when I talk to people, we normally say, your set of clothes you wear, a set of dry clothes and some change of underwear. Was that basically it, or did you have a little bit more of an elaborate wardrobe?
So I had two sets of cycling clothes, I guess, 2 pairs of shorts, and then 2 t-shirts. So it was quite important to try and keep my cycling shorts clean. So quite often, I'd be wearing one, and one would be like drying on the back of my bike. And then in addition to that, I had a set of off the bike clothes, so like a t-shirt and a pair of trousers, and a pair of leggings, which very versatile. I wore them at night if it was cold, or wore them on the bike if it was cold, or sometimes wore them on rest days.
But generally, I think, would I be right in saying that the weather and the sort of the temperature that you experienced during the trip actually didn't vary too much? There were occasional cold or wet days, but on the whole, it appeared from the pictures to be fairly mild, really? Yeah,
I mean, it was obviously very hot to start with in August. Then by the time I got to Greece, like northern Greece is very mountainous, and the Balkan Mountains as well, actually. So when I was sort of at over 1,000 metres, it was actually pretty chilly, and I'd be wearing a lot of my clothes when I was cycling, and even more of them, everything I owned when I was camping. So I had some really cold nights in Bosnia, and a couple of times I couldn't stay in the tent because I only had a summer sleeping bag, and it would have been too cold. But yeah, in general, I was very lucky with the weather, and the first 2 months I hardly had any rain really. I had a lot more in the last month, but I was very lucky, really.
Okay. And earlier on you mentioned that there were things you would change for your next trip or your next adventure, whatever that may be. And what things would you change then from what you actually took with you?
I'd get a better saddle.
Well, okay.
That'll be the first change.
That's your bum sorted.
Yeah. Well, my stove. So I had a stove that used those sort of camping gas cylinders. Mm-hmm. I think next time I'd probably get an MSR stove where you can just fill it up from like petrol stations and that kind of thing. Because I spend some days trying to find decathlon stores which are in horrible parts of town where you have to use main roads to get there, because it's very difficult to find camping gas in some countries. So I definitely would change that. With regard to the bike setup, I'm thinking for future trips to maybe transition to more of a bike packing type style of travel.
All right, okay, now for people who don't understand that, could you explain the difference between cycle touring and bike packing from the way you've just described it now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in bike packing. I've never actually done it before, but I met a few bike packers along the way, and they sort of ride a sort of mountain bike and all their gear, they carry less, I think, and it's sort of strapped to sort of in between the frame, on the handlebars and on the seat posts, and maybe on the front forks as well, in sort of small bags. So you don't have well, I think you could have a pannier rack if you wanted to, but traditionally bike packing, they don't have a pannier rack. It's just all strapped to the frame, and it gives you the freedom to travel on, get off the beaten path more, travel on rougher roads. Like with my bike, it struggled if we weren't on tarmac, and like I said, often the most valuable views and interesting places are those which are more difficult to get to. So I would like to ride a mountain bike in future to allow me to explore and experience more of those places.
And your clothing, is there anything particular in the clothing that you wish you had taken or would like to consider for a similar trip next time?
The only thing I didn't take, which I bought half the way through, was a snuggly pair of bed socks. It's getting a bit colder and it's nice to wear fluffy socks, keep your feet warm in bed. But apart from that, everything else I took I wouldn't change.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So coming back purely to kit now, what would you say was the most amazing, gosh, I'm glad I brought this piece of kit, and the one that you went, oh, that really has been a disappointment? Well,
my mat was really good. So you probably heard of the Thermarest Neo Light, like inflatable mattress.
The Neo Air, or was that Neo Light? Neo Air, yeah.
Neo Air. That was amazing. Like by the end of the trip, I could sleep through the whole night in my tent. Partly because I was really used to sleeping in a tent, but partly because I was so comfortable on this mattress. It was really good. Although it's a little bit noisy, so if you're sharing a tent with someone, they do have to cope with the sort of the crinkling of the mattress, but it didn't bother me at all. It was really, really comfortable. I definitely recommend that. It's warm as well because you're off the ground. And something that I would change, I didn't really have anything that was particularly bad.
Obviously, the panniers, I think probably the pannier rack rather was the thing that you mentioned earlier on as being the weakest part.
Yes, that broken pannier rack, and like I said, the saddle. They were the weak links, shall we say. Okay.
And then the trip itself, as you look back over the memories of the trip, and you're only freshly back. I mean, how long have you been back now?
Well, I finished last Thursday, so that's a week ago.
Oh, right, okay.
I came back from Athens until Monday. Had a bit of a weekend in Athens at the end.
Well, that's perfectly understandable. So we've got you fresh, as it were. So looking back on the trip as you start to tell the stories to us and to numerous other people, I'm sure, what would you recall as being the most enjoyable, the most special part, and the lowest point? Your highest point and your lowest point, basically.
So my high points were obviously the people and the amazing people that I met along the way, and in particular those moments that I mentioned in Hungary and in Germany. But there were just so many, I couldn't even mention everybody. There's so many great moments with the people. Then in terms of the countries and the cycling, the two definite highlights in terms of countries to me were Bosnia and Switzerland. The mountainous countries, although they are more challenging in terms of the cycling, they're just so much more interesting than the flat areas. So between when I set off from Budapest and went south, for 6 days, I had one hill, and it was absolutely just torturous. It's just flat, like day after day, it's so monotonous. I'd much prefer it when it's hilly. So Bosnia and Switzerland for the hills and for the views, definitely. In terms of low points, my lowest point was definitely in northern Italy, actually. So again, it was because it was flat. Northern Italy, between the lakes and Venice, is just loads and loads of just flat farmland. I don't think tourists really go there. There's not really any sites or anything, but I had to get across there to get to Venice. And because it's so flat, this is a problem with flat land, the headwinds were just an absolute nightmare. So I was cycling into the wind for like 3 days, and you could barely hear yourself think, the wind was so loud. And that's really tough. I had to sort of break each day down, and it'd just be like, just cycle the next 10 kilometres and then you can have a break and have some food, and had to break it down into very small little sections.
And when you've gone through all these different countries, have you picked up specifically what any particular rules are regarding wild camping for other potential cyclists?
It's definitely more difficult in Western Europe. I mean, I didn't go through any countries where it's specifically allowed, like where it's legal, like it is in sort of Scandinavia and Scotland. But when I reached, so I didn't have any problems from sort of Italy, Slovenia and Hungary sort of onwards. I found wild camping was very easy, in particular in the Balkan countries like in Hungary and Croatia and those kind of countries. I could camp in sort of view of people, and they wouldn't mind. Sometimes I'd just ask and check, say, is it all right to camp over there? And someone would, it was accepted that it was okay. The only place in Bosnia, so I was really worried about wild camping in Bosnia because they still have landmines from the war in the 90s. So I sort of in Bosnia as well. I didn't really want to wild camp, but once I arrived, I sort of realised actually most of the places where there's landmines are marked. But even so, I was very careful to not stray from the road. And so I sort of camped in picnic areas. One night I camped on a football pitch. And again, I always, if there was someone around, I just asked, is it okay to camp over there? And no one ever said that it was not okay. It was always fine.
On a personal note, what changes have you noticed about yourself physically? Have you, anything dynamically changed in your own physiological makeup?
I guess what I noticed was maybe the cycling felt a little bit easier, but not really. I still felt tired at the end of the day, but the next day, so after about a month, I didn't feel any stiffness or anything the next day. So the first few weeks, the next morning I'd be like, oh gosh, I feel so stiff. But after a month or so, my body recovered so much faster that I would feel really fresh the next day, even if I'd done a big day the day before.
Right, and now returning home, obviously you've rested, but are you still feeling really vibrant and strong, or are you actually is your body starting to crave different foods and that sort of thing?
Oh, I really miss being on the bike. The last 2 days I've been out cycling both days. So I will definitely try and keep going out as much as I can. I don't want to wait. I don't want to sort of lose all the strength that I've built up, I guess. So I do feel strong now after cycling every day.
For other people considering something like this, a couple of questions really. The first one is, do you have a knowledge or any idea of roughly what the whole trip cost you? Yes,
I do actually. So I had a budget. So for the 3 months, my budget was £2,000. And that didn't actually include my flight home, and I did it for a bit less, just under that. But I'll be honest, you could easily do it for less. I did treat myself to some meals out and occasional nights in hotels and hostels and that kind of thing. But really, I think £2,000 for 3 months is pretty good going.
So with that in mind, if there's somebody listening to this who fancies doing something similar, cycling around Europe and going into Eastern Europe and so on, what key parts of advice would you would pass on to other potential cyclists?
Now that I've done this trip, I think I've got a lot of knowledge of how I could do things sort of cheaper and better in future. So I definitely advise people to use the Warm Showers network if you can. But I'd also say to ask people for help when you need it. Like, so often, I don't know anything about these countries that I'm passing into. I don't even know where the shop is. I don't know if I can drink the water safely. But I think most people that you meet are incredibly friendly. I think everybody, well, not everybody, but most people want to help. But generally in your daily life, you don't necessarily get the opportunities to be really kind and to help somebody out. Whereas if you go over and ask somebody, you knock on their door or you approach them on the street and you need help with something or some advice, you're giving somebody the opportunity then to do something amazing and to help you out. And most people really, really want to do that. So I'd say don't be scared to approach people and to ask them to help you.
And would you say there's something specific you've learned about yourself in doing this?
Yes. I think when I set off on the trip, I was obviously incredibly nervous and very scared, and I thought I was going to be really lonely all the time. That was one of my biggest fears. I thought it was going to be very, very difficult. I thought it was going to be, almost beyond me, especially on that first day when I set off from London. But if I'm honest, it was in the end probably easier than I thought it was going to be. And I think often you can look at something and think, wow, that's so hard and so difficult. But once you set off and try and do it, you probably are capable of it. You're probably capable of a lot more than you think that you are. So now I definitely wonder, and I've done this now, it's definitely made me think, what else could I do? Could I go further? Could I go faster?
Okay, well, congratulations first of all on completing the trip, and obviously for sharing your story with us as well. It's been great to hear you. Obviously, full of the joys of the experience, which is fantastic. But one final question I've got for you: of all the things I could have asked you, what should I have asked you?
Why did I not do it earlier?
Okay.
Because I've wanted to do a trip like this for years, but there's so many things that stop you. So time and money and all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, if you really want to do something, you'll do it. And it took me a while to realise that. And now I've done one trip. I'm sure there's going to be many, many more.
Well, congratulations, and thanks once again for joining us. I'm obviously going to give people all the links to your blogs and some of the things we've been talking about. And all I can do is wish you well for your next trip, and hopefully when you complete that one, you'll have a chat with us then too.
Definitely. Thanks, Bob. It's been great to talk to you.
My thanks to Megan for sharing her trip with us. An enjoyable and positive escape from the humdrum of daily routine, and an experience I'm sure she will draw on for many years to come. As I say, links to everything we've talked about are on the Outdoor Station website, including the link to the Ultimate Frisbee Bristol team, if you feel like taking up something a little bit different. If you have anyone you would like to suggest for interview, do please pop along to the Outdoor Station website and use the newsletter or contact page to fill us in. Until next time, I'll leave you with this little saying about life. Sometimes the wrong choices we make take us to the right places. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.